All right. Well, good evening for my folks here on the East Coast, or evening if you're Central as well. Good afternoon for my folks further west, and hopefully your evening is going well if you're further east to me. My name is Whitney, and this is December 10th. I cannot believe we are almost at the end of 2023. We are almost at the end of GMAT Classic's run. Crazy. It's been a long run, GMAT Classic, but here comes GMAT Focus. Let's do it. So this evening's free prep hour, we are going to focus on the last of a multi-part series that I've been working on with y'all about the data insights section of the focus. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Again, my name is Whitney, or Whit. I am a GMAT, Jerry, and EA instructor here at Manhattan Prep, where I've been for a very long time at this point. So this evening's section, we are talking the last of the question tape, the good old classic data sufficiency. And so on GMAT Classic, data sufficiency is part of the quantitative section. As we move into the new year, once GMAT Classic is fully retired at the end of January 2024, we will have GMAT Focus fully on board. And for folks taking GMAT Focus right now, you will find data sufficiency as part of the data insights section of the test, along with 4 other question tapes. And so we have done a multi-part series. At this point, we've covered a lot. Ooh, I got a little excited with my screens. At this point, we've done the graphics interpretation questions. We've done the 2-part analysis questions. We've done the table analysis questions, and we've done the MSR. Last up is our friend, the data sufficiency question. So to give you sort of the big picture of the data insights section, right? So for those of you on GMAT Classic, data sufficiency is part of the normal quant section with problem solving. As we move into the new focus world, data sufficiency is one of many question types. It makes up about 1/3 of the data insights section. So this new data insights section is 20 minutes. If you're working under standard timing, that's 45 minutes. About 2/3 of that section will be made up of those tables, graphs, MSRs in 2 parts. The 12 questions that are currently part of the data interpretation section, as part of the integrated reasoning section of the GMAT. Those 12-ish questions have been brought together with the data sufficiency questions that used to be in the quantitative section to create this new data insight section. So data sufficiency problems will be somewhere between 4 and 8 total. Of those, only some will count. There will always be some experimental. And our goal is to spend about 2 minutes per question as we're working on them. Now, much like everything else in the data insights section, you will have a calculator in order to solve these problems. That said, data sufficiency appears, now that it is moving more firmly into the section on data insights, that we are losing a lot of the pure math forms of data sufficiency and instead moving into more logic-based questions. So you do have the calculator if you like it, if you need it, right? If you find it useful, and there will be times where you will want it. But we've definitely got the calculator there. You will, if you want to grab a calculator, you might want to use like the one on your phone. Just note the functionality that is available to you. Unlike the one that's on most people's phones, the calculator does have a square root function as well as a reciprocal function, which can be kind of nice. So just know that those are available to you. But I find that for most people, it's enough to just kind of use the calculator function on your phone. Yeah, you will not be able to use the phone calculator on test day. You will instead have to use the calculator that is clicky on screen. So another way to practice is if the computer that you use has an on-screen calculator that you can call up, like a simplistic one, then you may want to start practicing with that so that you're getting used to a mouse or your trackpad if you plan on taking your test at home. Other friendly reminder, if you're taking the test in a test center, you will have a mouse. It'll be a wired mouse. If you're taking the test at home, you are not allowed to have any Bluetooth peripherals. So if you, like me, have a wireless mouse, that is not permitted. You have to have a wired in mouse, or you'll have to use the trackpad on your laptop or what else. So you'll need all peripherals need to be wired into your machine, and you cannot have a second monitor. Just the one. Okay, so we are going to start on our little kind of search of data sufficiency, just sort of getting to understand like what is data sufficiency for those of you that maybe haven't really seen it before. And we'll talk a little bit about organizing your paper, kind of organizing your mind, how you want to get yourself in order for these fun data sufficiency questions. So what I'd like to do is just start you off with an example problem. You can have the full thing. Our general time for these is, again, about 2 minutes, excuse me. So we'll have about 2 minutes to solve each problem. Generally, when you're practicing, I recommend a timer that counts up. For this first question, I'm going to cut you off at that 2-minute mark. But as we work on further questions, know that generally speaking, you can push that time anywhere from about 1 minute to 3 minutes if you're, again, working under standard timing. So if you got a timer going at home, feel free to get it started. I'll have one on screen for you, and then we'll talk about this question on the other side. All right. So let us go a little bit over. If you did not do so yet, go ahead and send me your answer and send that to hosts and panelists. And yeah, Divya, if you had a question, feel free to type it in the chat window as well. And I'll set these so that if you'd like, if it's easier to ask the question that way, I'll add the audio. There you go. Made sure that the names changed. But yeah, Divya, your question.
Oh, I don't have a question. I just clicked the raise hand on accident.
Oh yeah, no worries. Just wanted to check. Okay. All right. So I've gotten an answer from a couple of you. If you have not given me an answer, I know we got some folks just joining us because I think the link was kind of an issue. So feel free to take a second to solve this. But what I'd like to start with first is just an understanding of how data sufficiency works. Okay, so a little bit about data sufficiency. It will always have this kind of generic format where we have a question stem at the top. We'll then have 2 statements labeled 1 and 2, and we'll have 5 answer choices that never change. It's always these, same verbal answer choices. Okay, so all data sufficiency questions have this format. If you see any questions that have like a 1-2 statement, that means you're in data sufficiency. Now, the question stem up front might provide information. So you might be given some actual information. It might just ask you a question. So this provides very little upfront information. It gives you the context of a conference, and it tells you that there are employees there, but we don't get any other information. I don't know how many people were at this conference. I don't know how many employees were at the conference. I don't know anything. I am generally just given the question: how many of the employees were senior managers? So one of the first things we'll want to do is work to get onto our paper the question itself. And the way you kind of make that happen, right, is up to you. You want to make sure that it's as visually appealing as possible, right? So you want to make sure that as you're getting your question down, it is something that feels like, okay, I see what this is after. So I don't have a lot of upfront information, so I'm going to go ahead and just mark my question. I always mark my question with a Q with a giant box around it just to make it really, really obvious. And then I'm asking how many of my employees, the number of employees, how many of those are senior managers? Right, I might use words, I might use some phrasing, just keeping myself super organized, right, extremely organized. All right, next step, okay? Next up, what I'll do is start to look at my 2 statements. Now, we're going to talk about this a couple of times throughout the evening, but please keep in mind that the statements themselves are facts. Okay, so this information I'm about to give you, these are facts. So I don't want you to start asking yourself things like, is it true? Is it right? Is it correct? These 2 statements are always true. They are facts. Okay, so the question in this world of data sufficiency is, given this fact, given that this fact is true, can I answer this question? So I like to organize myself sort of side by side. I like to do my work for statement 1 on the left and my work for statement 2 on the right, just so that I can kind of have them next to each other on my paper. So for statement 1, here's what I know. I know that 80% of my total, so of all my employees, so 80% of the total, so of often means multiply, 80% of the total were senior managers. The question is, does that tell me how many, meaning the number? So I know the proportion that are senior managers, but I don't know the number that are senior managers. Well, proportion isn't really a number. It's a percent. So I can't say there were 12 or there were 8 or, right? I need to know the total. I need to know some other sort of number. And so what I will say to myself in the language of data sufficiency is that this answer is not enough, or in other words, it is not sufficient. Okay, so this is not sufficient. I cannot get an answer to my question. Now let's go and look at our answer choices. And you might notice that the answer choices are this language of, is it enough or is it not enough? Right? Is it enough or is it not enough? So again, I'm not trying to determine whether the statement is true or false or correct or right, because it's always true. It's always correct. It's always right. Okay, so the statements are true. Statements are true. Statements are true. What I'm trying to figure out is, can I answer the question? Does the statement give me enough information to answer the question as given? Okay. So if I've decided that statement 1 is not sufficient to answer the question, I can eliminate any answer choices that say that it is. So all of our answer choices in data sufficiency are a mix of, is it statement 1 that is sufficient or enough? Is it statement 2 that is sufficient or enough? Is it that they're both enough, right? Each statement alone is enough. Do I have to use them together to get the answer? That would be C. Or I can't get an answer no matter what. Some things to note. Answer choices A and B indicate that it is one statement, but not the other. So it is statement 1, but not 2. It is statement 2, but not 1. If both statements alone are sufficient, I would choose D. If I end up putting them together because I was not able to get an answer, I'm going to choose C. Do take note that the second half of C is essential. I only put my 2 statements together. I only put my 2 statements together if I have to, if I have not gotten an answer yet. So statement 1 is not sufficient. I am going to eliminate answer choices A and D. Okay, I'm going to eliminate answer choices A and D. All right, next up, I'm going to move into statement 2. Now, the key here when I start to read statement 2 is that I need to forget statement 1 for a moment. Because again, in B, statement 2 is alone, but not statement 1, means that I need to think about statement 2 in a vacuum, all by itself, ignoring what I know about statement 1. So statement 2 says of the employees who attended the conference, 64, I have a real number, 64 were not senior managers. Well, I don't know from just statement 2 the relationship between non-senior managers and senior managers. So there's no way for me to connect that 64 back. And so statement 2 is also not sufficient. I'm going to eliminate statement 2. I'm going to take that off the menu. Okay. Next up. I now move to, right, I've tested statement 1, wasn't sufficient by itself. It was not enough by itself. I looked at statement 2, it was not enough by itself to answer the question. I am now going to move, get these out of the way, to putting the 2 statements together. Okay, so if I put my 2 statements together at this point, now I'm down to C and E. So I'll bring this information together. If 80% of my total are senior managers, that would imply that the other 20% of my total are not senior managers. I also know that the not senior managers equals 64 people. So I know that 20% of the total, 0.2 of my total, is equal to 64. Now you have a calculator, so you could in fact absolutely grab it and start to calculate. But what you want to recognize is that if you were going to solve for this, you would divide both sides by 0.2. Right? You take 64 divided by 2, divided by 0.2, and you get a number that spits out. Once you know that number, you could then potentially plug it back in here, find 80% of that number, and that would tell you the senior managers. Again, you have a calculator, but the key is that you recognize that I would know my total. It would be a real value. I would then take 80% of that number, and that would be my numeric answer, which is sufficient, meaning I have a single value that would answer my question. You might also note that if 20% of your total is 64, to figure out what 80% of your total is, you would need to take 20% and multiply that by 4, since 80% is 4 times 20%. So again, I could stick 4 times 64 in my calculator, but I'm not going to, because it's going to spit out a number. My correct answer, C. I have to use the two statements together to get a value. I have to use my two statements together to get a value. Okay. So sometimes data sufficiency can be quite algebraic. Okay. So let's try that again. I want you to start to use your process of elimination. I want you to think about each statement alone. I want you to resist the urge to jam everything into your calculator and instead try to consider, is this enough information or not? We'll move through the same sequence, and then we'll look for a little bit more of a setup where you can organize yourself. Here you go. Okay. If you haven't yet, send me what you think the answer to this question is. Nice. Okay. Got lots of answers coming in. Excellent. So once again, we're going to try and organize ourselves. And now the answer choices will be on the screen. They'll always be on the screen for you. We're going to start to build. I'm going to shrink them a little bit so we have some space. We're going to start to build a shortcut, like a little mnemonic to help us kind of remember and track our work. But once again, we're going to start by trying to identify the question. We'll go up front. I usually mark it with a Q, kind of put it like prominent in the area where I'm working. I want to know the monthly rent And then if I had any other upfront information, I'd kind of stick it up for somewhere. All right, let's look at statement 1. Keep it nice and separate. The monthly rent per person for 4 people to share the rent for the apartment is $375. In other words, if I were to take the total rent and I were to divide it by 4, that would make $375. If I multiply both sides by 4, that would give me the total rent for the month. That's a real value that I'm not going to calculate. That means statement 1 is sufficient. Statement 1 is sufficient. And so this time I will eliminate everything that I didn't last time. And so there's actually an organization here when we start with statement 1. We start with A as statement 1 or B as statement 2. Okay. So if we start with statement 1, A comes first. And then we're going to write A, D, B, C, E. Right? That's going to be our organization on our paper. Notice that this is a statement 1 first grid. If we wanted to do statement 2 first, we would keep all of this DCE the same. Right? DCE stays the same. And we would just swap A versus B. So if I wanted to do statement 2 first, I would be evaluating the 2 answer choices, B and D, where statement 2 is sufficient, versus the 2 where statement 2 is not sufficient. So A. Okay, so notice that DCE stays the same for both. Okay, so statement 1 is sufficient. So I will eliminate B, C, and E. So even if I don't know what to do with statement 2, I can at least make an educated guess. I've got a 50-50 shot. So in this case, I'm working on statement 1. I'm eliminating BCE, that whole row. Statement 2. This seems a lot more complicated. But let's set it up. The monthly rent per person for 4 people to share the rent is $125 less than the rent for 3. So I'm going to write for a moment, I'm going to be like per person for 4 is equal to per person for 3 people minus 125. Let me just think about this. The per person rate for 4 people, well, I find that by taking the total and I divide it by 4, which means if I want the per person rate for 3 people, I find the total, I divide it by 3. Notice what we have. I'm using words right now, but I could call this T or R or whatever variable I want. But I have an equation with only one variable in it. Right? If I'm going to call this variable T for total rent, T over 4 equals T over 3 minus 125. I could bring the T over 3, right? This is the same as maybe another way of writing this that might feel more comfortable is like 1/4 T and 1/3 T. I could solve. I could try and solve this. And I would be able to get, like 0.25 minus 0.33 approximately. 0.25 T minus 0.33 T. Got the T again. 0.25 T minus 0.33 T equals a negative 125. This is what, like minus 0.08 T equals negative 125. I could put in my calculator. I'm going to get a value for T. So even if it doesn't seem like it's the most direct or upfront information, it turns out that statement 2 is also sufficient. I can solve this expression or this equation for the total amount of rent. That means that my correct answer is D. So be careful. Often statements will give us information in ways that are somewhat unexpected, right? It's maybe not obvious that that's sufficient, that that is enough to get us an answer. So we want to slow things down. We don't want to rush. Yeah, we do not want to rush. Turns out that these problems can also be a little bit more logical, right? So we can think about, how like a logic game might play out, or just sort of think, right? It doesn't always seem as mathy. Right? It doesn't always seem as mathy. But let's try another. Again, you might know that the GMAT focus does not test geometry. So it might still give you shapes, though. It might still give you shape concepts. And in fact, it might even give you coordinate geometry. But let's try another. So we've added this concept of the elimination grid. We've added the concept of the elimination grid. And so now what you might want to think about is like employing that. I'll leave the answer choices on the screen again, just so you can practice with them. But let's try this problem. And we'll set up our paper again. Here you go. Okay, so I am not seeing as many answers coming in this time. Not seeing as many others at this point. Give me a guess, even if it is just a guess. Okay. All right. Okay, so we've got a different situation happening this time. I'm gonna scooch some of this a little bit out of the way. Get our answer choices down smaller. Definitely think for this one, I might for sure start with statement 1. It looks a lot more straightforward. But I now have some upfront information. So I might sketch something that looks like this graphic on my paper. And I want to know if, it's a weird question, will the first 10 volumes of a 20 volume encyclopedia fit on this book rack? Okay, so my question is something like 10 books, maybe the width, sum of the width of the books. Is that going to equal X? Right, and this is 10 books. I should have said 10 books. Does that equal X? Okay, I don't know. I just want to get it on my paper. All right, so statement 1 tells me that the X is 50 centimeters, but I don't know anything about the width of the books. So definitely starting with A, D, B, C, E. Statement 1 is not enough information. Knowing that the bookshelf is 50 centimeters does not tell me if my 10 books will fit. They might be too big, they might be too small. And I'll move to statement 2, nice and organized. Okay, this says that 12 of the volumes have an average thickness of 5 centimeters. Well, I think what they're trying to make me think is that my average formula is equal to the sum divided by the number of terms. So 5 would be equal to the sum of 12 books. So 12 books would be 60. But also if they all have the same size, right? If all 20 books are the same, then 10 books at that average of 5 centimeters would be 50 centimeters. However, I don't know how wide the bookcase is. I also don't know if all of my books are the same thickness. They didn't tell me they were. They didn't say, well, the first 10 volumes of a 20 volume encyclopedia where all the volumes are the same width or thickness or whatever, they're all the same. They didn't tell me that. So from statement 2, do I not only know X, I not only don't know X, I don't know how wide any of my books are. So still not sufficient. If I put them together, I know what X is, but I still don't know, right? 12 of the volumes might include 10 volumes, and those volumes might all be 5 centimeters, but those volumes might be smaller than 5 centimeters, and a couple of them are really big, or a couple of those 10 volumes might be way bigger, or 8 of these 10 volumes might not even be in these 12, right? So I don't know the size of the books. I still don't have an answer. Not sufficient. My correct answer is E. So I know that this can feel sort of like, oh, this is more frustrating. This is way more frustrating. And so we want to start to think like, well, how am I going to organize, right? Like I want to keep track of, what's happening. It's definitely more frustrating to get to E because it feels like maybe I should have been able to get to an answer. But keep in mind, E is a perfectly valid answer. Perfectly valid answer. Okay. These questions, as I kind of mentioned, as they move their way into this data insight section, are starting to shift away from classical quant into something that can sometimes feel a little bit more like logic. Okay, a lot more like logic, in fact. So let's try, same organization, right? Same setup. Let's try one that is more of this logical style, more logic style of question. Again, the answer choices are there for you, but they do not change. And so your A, D, B, C, E, or B, D, A, C, E, depending on which one you want to start with, could be really helpful. Here you go. All right, getting a little bit more complicated, yeah? Okay. Okay, so let me stop our timer. So the Smiths take their children to a certain amusement park. Oh, okay. On exactly one Saturday every calendar month. That's a lot. Today is the 1st of July. Did the Smiths and their children make a trip to the amusement park on one of the past 3 days? Okay, so this seems like a lot, but let's start with what we think we need to know. In order to be able to answer this question, what do we need to know? So today is the 1st of July. So the 3 days before that, so today is 7/1. The 3 days before that would have been the 30th, the 29th, and the 28th. So we need to know, is it one of the last 1, 2, 3 days? So what do I actually need to know? I know that they take their kids to the amusement park exactly one Saturday every calendar month. One Saturday. So I need to figure out, one, is one of these days a Saturday? And did they take their kids to the amusement park already? Right, so I'm looking at like, okay, first off, is it even possible that one of these days is a Saturday? Is one of those days a Saturday? Because if it's not a Saturday, then I can say no, for sure. And if so, did they, already go? Right? Did they already go to the park? Okay. So I'm going to start this one with statement 2. So instead of ADBCE, I'm going to move to BDACE. I'm going to move down here to a BDACE because I want to start with statement 2. Statement 2 seems a whole lot easier. Seems like it's going to help me figure out what day of the month these days are. So if the 23rd was a Sunday, okay, so we've got 23rd. I'm going to list out my days: 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. So the 23rd was a Sunday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So the 29th was a Saturday. So it is possible. It is possible that they took their kids to the amusement park, but it's not guaranteed because they could have also taken their kid to an amusement park any other time earlier in the month. So statement 2, not sufficient. It's close. It does tell us it's possible. So B and D are out. I'm going to move to statement 1. Okay. Statement 1. The Smiths made their June trip to the amusement park on one of the past 7 days. Oh, well, the past 7 days would be 1, 2, right? I'll just copy these again. The past 7 days would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So not the 23rd, but the 24th. And I know that from my second statement, this would be Monday through Sunday. So Saturday, they went at some point during this week. Now, if the Smiths made their June trip to the amusement park on one of the past 7 days, the key here is that we don't know, right? So we know it was one of these. Sorry, I lied to you. We don't know which days of the week it is yet. We just know that it is also possible, right? It is also possible that it happened somewhere in here. I just don't know which one of them is Saturday. So is it one of these 3? Maybe. Is it one of these 4? Maybe. So still not sufficient. Okay. And I just almost fell victim to one of the most dangerous traps, which is statement carryover, right? So I only knew the days because of statement 2. And I accidentally ported that over when I thought about it with statement 1, although I wasn't supposed to. And so without that, right, I don't know. So statement 1, also not sufficient. However, when I do put those 2 things together, I know that Saturday is the 29th. That's the only Saturday in the last 7 days. And so 1 plus 2 gives me that Saturday the 29th was the day they went. So that is sufficient. The correct answer is C. All right, let's try then one more before we call it an evening. Let's try one more. Let's go. Yeah, let's go for, again, this one's a little bit more mathy. This might feel a little bit more like, what we're used to. And so let's grab, here you go, your statement. Here we go. Oops. All right. Take your time, set up and organize, and then we'll summarize and close it out for the evening. Here we go. All right. So if you haven't done so yet, go ahead and send me your answer. All right. Our upfront question. We have the sum of $200,000 was divided among a spouse and 3 kiddos. So I'm going to say that 200 is equal to spouse plus K1 plus K2 plus whatever, K3. And then it says how much they say to the youngest child receive. So I'll make K3 the youngest. You can call it a Y if you want, but I'm going to make them aged, like the firstborn, secondborn, thirdborn. So the question is K3 equals what? Well, they look the same, the statements. So I'll start with statement one. That's fine with me. So statement one, one doesn't seem like obviously easier than the other. So we'll do an AD, BCE. The spouse received, so the spouse got half of the estate. So that would be 100. And the oldest kid, so K1, got 1/4 of the remainder. So the remainder would have been 100, and a quarter of that would have been 25. Okay. That means that the K2 and K3, right, so K2 plus K3 would equal the remaining 75,000, but not sufficient. I'm going to take out A and D. Statement 2, each of the two younger children received 12,500 more. So that must mean that the two younger kids had the same amount. So K2 equals K3 equals K1 minus 12,500. And K2 equals K3 also equals the spouse minus 62,500. Okay. Well, let's think about what we know. We have this upfront information. If I were to sort of take this first equation, I'm going to call these the same thing. I'm just going to make these both like K3. Let's call them both K3. Okay. So if K3 equals K1 minus 12,500, then if I add, right, K3 plus 12,500 would equal K1. I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other one, right? If K3 equals S minus this, then K3 plus this thing, 62,500, is equal to the spouse. So I'm figuring out what all these, like, here's what the oldest kid, here's what the spouse made. What I can do is take my original equation, 200 equals, and replace it. Instead of the spouse, I'll put K3 plus 62.5 instead of K2. I'm going to write, instead of K1, I'm going to write K3 plus 12.5 thousand, since I kind of abbreviated that one. So this was the spouse originally. This was K1. K2 is the same as K3. Right? So that was originally K2. And now K3 is still just K3. What do I have? I have an equation here where I could combine, right? Like 200,000 equals 1, 2, 3, 4 of this K3 variable plus whatever the heck those two numbers would be if they were added together. Okay. And so it means that I could solve this equation. I'd subtract this number from 200. That would give me a number is equal to 4K3. I would divide both sides by 4, and I would have a solution. Therefore, statement 2 alone is sufficient. B. So be careful. It is very easy, right? We saw this in a couple of different examples, how easy it is to get tricked into thinking you need more information than you actually do. All right, friends. Thank you so much for hanging out this evening. It's a pleasure to get to work with you. We have tons and tons and tons of free study resources available. So feel free to go to our manhattanprep.com website, GMAT, /classes/free, where you can hang out with us. You can attend any of our full length courses. You can attend session 1 for free. We've also got our free prep hours. We've got our foundations of math classes. All of those are free as well. So come hang out with us, come check out what we've got available, and we'll see you soon. Have a great rest of your evening, great rest of the year. Take care all.